Before we dive into this lost kingdom richer than Egypt, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell. Because here on this channel, history isn't just told, it's brought back to life. The year is 1490 BCE. The Egyptian sun blazes mercilessly over the Nile, but the air is thick not with despair but with whispers. Whispers of a land beyond deserts and seas, a kingdom so rich that Egypt itself bowed in awe. A place they called Punt, God's land. Gold flowed there as easily as the Nile itself. Ebony trees stretched into the heavens, their wood darker and more precious than any pharaoh's crown. Incense, sweet, intoxicating, unperfumed the air, worth more than diamonds to a people who believed it carried prayers to the gods. To step into Punt was to step into a living treasure chest, a kingdom more dazzling than the temples of Thebes, more lavish than the palaces of Memphis. And yet, you won't find Punt on any modern map. Its palaces are gone, its kings forgotten, its name nearly erased from the history books. But once it rivaled Egypt, once its merchants stood in Pharaoh's courts, their arms heavy with gifts so dazzling that even mighty Hatshepsut, Queen of Egypt, ordered a grand fleet to sail across dangerous seas just to touch its shores. Picture the moment, Egyptian sailors gripping ropes, their ships creaking under the desert sun as they prepared to launch into the unknown. Fear twisted in their guts, storms, monsters, foreign kings who might slit their throats. Yet greed burned hotter. The promise of Punt, riches beyond imagining, was worth any risk. One sailor, a young man named Kem, scribbled on a shard of pottery before leaving, "If I do not return, bury me with the scent of incense. Let my spirit sail to Punt." His words capture the madness, the obsession. Punt was not just a kingdom. It was a dream, a fever, a paradise that Egypt both craved and feared. And here lies the mystery. Punt existed. Egypt's records tell us so. Walls carved with images of Punt's rulers, their strange beards, their exotic animals. We know the Egyptians feasted on Punt's treasures, yet today its location is uncertain. Ethiopia? Somalia? Eritrea? Or lost beneath sands and seas forever? All we know for certain is this. Punt was once richer than Egypt itself. But why did it vanish? Who erased its name from history's scrolls? That is where our story begins, in a kingdom of gold and shadows, a kingdom that rose brighter than Egypt's own sun, and then disappeared without a trace. The palace of Karnak trembled with anticipation. Hatshepsut, Pharaoh of Egypt, a woman ruling in a man's world, stood tall beneath the golden rays of Ra. Her throne was draped in silks, her crown glimmered, but her eyes burned with something deeper, ambition. Egypt was rich, yes, but she wanted more. She wanted to outshine every pharaoh before her. And she knew only one kingdom could give her that glory, Punt. In a voice that echoed through the temple halls, Hatshepsut declared, "We sail not to conquer, but to bring the riches of the gods back to Egypt." Her priests nodded. Her generals shifted uneasily. For what she proposed was madness, a fleet of ships built to sail not the calm Nile, but the treacherous Red Sea, a world where storms could crush timber and devour men whole. Yet Hatshepsut commanded it, and so it was done. The shipyards roared with life. Carpenters hammered day and night, their hands raw with splinters. Sailcloth flapped like thunder. Carts dragged cedar wood, precious, imported from Lebanon, to build vessels large enough to carry Pharaoh's dream across the edge of the known world. Among the workers was a sailor named Beck. His back was scarred from years of rowing war galleys, but his heart leapt with pride. To be chosen for the Punt voyage was no mere task. It was to serve the gods themselves. At night he whispered to his wife, "If I return, we will never know hunger again. Punt will feed us all." Then came the day of departure. Karnak's priests lined the docks, their chants rising with the morning mist. Incense coiled into the sky, masking the stench of fish and sweat. Hatshepsut herself stood at the water's edge, her hand raised in blessing. The fleet, 5 great ships with towering masts, slid into the sea. Oars splashed. Sails caught the wind. A cheer erupted from the crowd, though beneath it mothers wept silently. Few had ever dared this journey. Fewer still had returned. For weeks the fleet battled the sea. Salt stung their lips, waves thundered like mountains crashing, and at night the stars were their only guides. Men sang to keep fear away, their voices hoarse, their bodies bruised. Yet hope carried them forward, hope of gold, of incense, of punt. One storm nearly ended it all. Lightning split the sky, rain lashed like whips, and Beck clung to the mast as the ship groaned. He prayed not to Ra but to Punt itself. "Let me see your shores, and I will die content." And then, on the horizon, land. Strange trees, dark and tall. The air heavy with spice. Punt. The dream was real. But what awaited them there was far more than trade. It was an encounter that would change both kingdoms forever. The morning sun rose over an alien horizon. The sailors rubbed their eyes, blinking at a sight no Egyptian had ever witnessed. The air was thick with fragrance, cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense, scents so rich they seemed to dance upon the wind. Beck, still trembling from the storm, gripped the ship's railing. Before him stretched groves of towering incense trees, their branches glistening with sap that shone like molten amber. Birds screamed in colors he had no name for, and along the shoreline, huts of reed and timber stood above the waves on stilts, homes unlike any in Egypt. They had reached Punt. Trumpets sounded from the shore. Figures appeared, not as enemies with spears, but as hosts with garlands of flowers and bowls of sweet wine. Their skin glistened in the sun, their garments woven with bright threads, their hair braided with gold rings. These were a people proud, unafraid, and they had been expecting the Egyptians. From the largest hut emerged two figures. The first was King Pharaoh, tall, draped in leopard skin, his arms heavy with gold. Beside him, carried in a litter, was his queen. Unlike the slender queens of Egypt, she was of immense size, her body adorned with jewels, her face painted with ochre. To Egyptians, her form was a marvel, a queen whose presence radiated power. The Egyptians fell silent. Then one of Hatshepsut's envoys, trembling but resolute, stepped forward. He raised his hands in peace and spoke. "We come from Kemet, land of the Nile, bearing gifts from our pharaoh, Hatshepsut, chosen of Amun." Servants rushed forward, opening crates. Gold trinkets, glass beads, and perfumes spilled out, shimmering beneath the sun. The Puntites gasped in delight, but they were not easily impressed, for soon their own treasures were revealed. Ivory tusks longer than a man's arm, skins of leopards spotted like fire, monkeys chattering in cages, their eyes bright with mischief, and most wondrous of all, living incense trees, their roots bound in baskets, ready to be planted in Egyptian soil. Beck's heart nearly burst. He whispered to the man beside him, "This is no kingdom. This is paradise." But paradise came at a price. Negotiations stretched late into the night, fires crackling as voices rose and fell. The Egyptians wanted more than gold. They wanted alliance. Punt was no mere market. It was a gate to the gods. And as Queen Ati's eyes glittered in the firelight, her lips curling into a knowing smile, the Egyptians realized they had stepped not just into a land of wealth, but into the embrace of rulers who understood their own power. For in Punt, nothing came without cost. And the bargain they struck would shape Egypt's destiny. Night fell heavy over Punt. Torches flickered, painting shadows across the wooden stilts of the royal compound. The air was thick with spice and smoke, curling into the sky like offerings to unseen gods. Around a fire sat the envoys of Egypt and the rulers of Punt, a circle of strangers bound by greed and destiny. King Pharaoh's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You come with gold, perfumes, beads. Pretty things, yes, but we are Punt. We give life to gods. We hold incense that feeds your temples. What will Egypt give in return?" The Egyptian envoy swallowed hard. He had prepared for this moment. Servants dragged forward crates covered in linen. When the cloth was pulled back, the Puntites gasped. Within lay bronze tools sharper than obsidian, mirrors polished to perfection, and the ultimate marvel, weapons of copper that gleamed red under the firelight. The queen leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. Her eyes narrowed, reflecting the flames. "Yes," she whispered, "but why should Punt bind itself to Egypt and not another? Why should we not keep our treasures for ourselves?" For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The Egyptians knew this was no simple trade. Punt was testing them. Power, not gifts, would seal this bargain. The envoy straightened, summoning courage, because only Egypt can make Punt eternal. "Our pharaoh does not come as a beggar. She comes as a partner. In stone we will carve your names beside hers, On the walls of Karnak, the world will see you as gods. The words rippled through the chamber like a spell. Immortality, the promise of being remembered forever, struck deeper than gold. For even kings feared time. Beck, listening from the shadows, saw Queen Atti's lips twitch into a sly smile. She raised her hand, heavy with rings, and servants stepped forward with gifts, living incense trees, baskets of ivory, jars of myrrh so fragrant they made the sailors dizzy. The deal had been struck. Punt would share its treasures, and Egypt would carry its memory into eternity. Yet as the night wore on, Beck noticed something unsettling. In hushed whispers, Puntite merchants spoke of droughts creeping at their borders, of rival tribes stirring in the highlands, of wars simmering unseen. Punt was wealthy, yes, but beneath the perfume of incense lingered the stench of fear. The Egyptians left with joy, believing they had secured a triumph. But as their ships groaned under the weight of Punt's riches, Beck could not shake the queen's smile, a smile that hinted at secrets never spoken. For in every bargain lies a hidden cost, and Egypt had just bound itself to a fate it could not yet see. The Red Sea spat the ships back onto Egyptian shores like treasures from the gods themselves. Their sails were torn, their hulls scarred by storms, but they carried the weight of paradise. As the fleet docked at Thebes, drums thundered, trumpets blared, and crowds surged along the banks of the Nile. Beck, weary and sunburnt, staggered onto the sand. His legs shook, but his eyes widened at the sight before him. Thousands had gathered, their faces glowing with awe as porters unloaded the cargo of Punt. Elephants trumpeted, monkeys shrieked, and the fragrance of incense trees filled the air. Golden ivory gleamed beneath the sun, so blinding that women shielded their eyes. At the heart of the procession stood Pharaoh Hatshepsut. She wore a crown of lapis and gold, her robe white as moonlight. As the treasures of Punt passed before her, she lifted her hands to the sky. "Behold!" Her voice rang out, echoing against temple walls. "The gods have blessed Egypt with the wealth of Punt. I, Hatshepsut, have brought heaven to earth." The people roared in adoration. Priests fell prostrate, their chants rising like thunder. To them, Punt was no distant kingdom. It was a holy land, a place where gods walked among men, and Hatshepsut had tamed it for Egypt. But glory is a weapon. Within days, artisans carved the triumph onto the walls of Deir el-Bahri, Hatshepsut's magnificent mortuary temple. There, for eternity, Punt's king and queen were etched in stone, immortalized beside the pharaoh. Images showed Puntites carrying incense trees, laden with treasures, bowing before Hatshepsut as though she were a goddess incarnate. The message was clear. Egypt was unrivaled. Its queen had achieved the impossible. Yet beneath the hymns of praise, whispers stirred. Some nobles muttered that Hatshepsut's obsession with Punt was reckless, draining coffers and tempting the gods with arrogance. Others sneered that she had sought Punt not for Egypt's sake, but for her own glory. Beck, standing among the crowd, felt pride swell in his chest. He had seen Punt. He had touched its treasures. And yet in the back of his mind a shadow lingered. He remembered the whispers of drought, the unease in the merchants' voices, the Queen of Punt's sly smile. Punt was not eternal. Its riches were vast, but its foundations fragile. As torches lit the night, Beck looked up at the carved walls and wondered, what happens when paradise begins to crumble? For even as Hatshepsut bathed in triumph, the seeds of Punt's downfall were already being sown. Far from Thebes' towering temples, deep in the incense groves of Punt, the air hung heavy with unease. The sap that once flowed freely now trickled thin, the sweet scent of myrrh tainted by something sour, the stench of desperation. Queen Atti sat in her shaded pavilion, her fingers heavy with gold rings. Around her merchants argued, their voices sharp, their brows damp with sweat. "The rains have not come," one growled. "The rivers shrink. Caravans from the highlands bring less each season." King Parahu clenched his jaw. Punt's wealth was bound to its land, the incense trees, the ebony forests, the ivory herds. But land can betray its people. Drought crept closer each year, gnawing at the roots of paradise, and wealth so dazzling drew eyes like vultures. Rival tribes watched from the highlands, hungry for ivory, for slaves, for Punt's power. Whispers told of raiders circling villages, snatching cattle, torching incense groves. For every caravan that left Punt's borders, Fewer returned. Still, Punt had Egypt. Their alliance with Hatshepsut had filled their stores with bronze and copper, weapons sharper than stone. The king assured his court, "We are untouchable. Egypt needs us. The gods favor us." But not all agreed. In the markets, common folk grumbled. To them, Egypt was no savior. It was a parasite. "We bleed our incense trees dry for Pharaoh's temples," one fisherman spat. "And what do we eat? Dust." A boy named Nari, no older than 12, watched as his father returned from the groves empty-handed. His hands raw from scraping bark that yielded no resin. Nari's stomach growled, but more than hunger he felt fear. Fear that Punt, the land of gods, was slipping into the hands of men too weak to stop its fall. That night, as torches guttered in the wind, Queen Ati confided to her husband, "Egypt carved our faces into stone. They will remember us as gods, but gods cannot beg for rain." Her eyes glistened. "If Punt falls, what will remain of us?" Pharaoh said nothing. He stared into the darkness, where the cries of jackals echoed like omens. Far across the desert in Thebes, Bek still celebrated Punt's glory, but he could not shake the memory of the queen's smile, or the unease in her words. He did not know that even as Egypt sang songs of Punt, the kingdom itself teetered at the edge of ruin. For paradise is most fragile at its height, and when wealth becomes a beacon, it also becomes a target. The carved walls of Deir el-Bahri still gleamed with images of Punt's glory. The queen in her litter, incense trees swaying as if alive, treasures laid at Hatshepsut's feet. But stone does not change, even when men do. And in Egypt the winds of power shifted. Hatshepsut's reign ended, swallowed by her stepson Thutmose III, the warrior pharaoh, conqueror of Canaan and Syria. His gaze turned north, to battlefields dripping with blood, to empires whose wealth was measured not in incense, but in tribute from conquered lands. Punt, distant and fragile, faded from his thoughts. The fleets to Punt dwindled. The once glorious voyages became whispers, then memories. Without Egypt's hunger, Punt's markets grew silent. Incense piled high in warehouses unsold. The same trees that had once promised immortality now stood as reminders of a fading bond. In Punt's royal court, unease thickened into bitterness. Queen Ati, older now, clutched her gold bracelets with trembling fingers. "They have forgotten us," she hissed. "Hatshepsut carved us into eternity, but her heirs care nothing for our names." King Pharaoh, weary and grey, tried to hold hope. Egypt will return, they must. Their gods still crave incense. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. Egypt's gods were many, and so were its choices. Punt was no longer the only jewel on Pharaoh's crown. Outside the palace walls, the people of Punt felt the weight of abandonment. Farmers cursed the thinning rains. Fishermen cursed empty nets. Merchants cursed empty docks where Egyptian ships once stood proud. For centuries, Punt had lived as Egypt's mirror, its partner, its lifeline. Now that mirror cracked. Enemies smelled weakness. Highland raiders struck caravans, stealing ivory, enslaving the young. The bronze weapons gifted by Egypt dulled with time, while new rivals wielded iron, harder and deadlier than anything Punt had known. In the village of Adal, young Nari, now a man hardened by hunger, gripped a spear with shaking hands as raiders descended. Fire consumed the incense groves, the very lifeblood of Punt. His father fell beside him, a cry torn from his throat. Nari survived, but the land of gods burned. Back in Thebes, Bek walked the temple halls where Hatshepsut's carvings still told of Punt's glory. He traced the lines with his fingers, his heart heavy. He whispered, "Where are they now? Do they still live? Or is Punt already ash?" But there was no answer. Only silence, and in silence kingdoms die. For when allies turn their backs, even the richest paradise cannot stand forever. The night was thick with smoke. Not the sweet incense that once perfumed the temples of Egypt, but acrid, choking smoke that clawed at the lungs. Flames devoured the incense groves of Punt, turning golden sap into rivers of fire. Nari ran barefoot across the scorched earth, spear in hand. The shouts of raiders split the darkness, guttural cries, the clang of iron against bronze, the screams of women dragged from their homes. Punt's defenders fought with desperate fury, but their spears splintered against iron blades, their bronze dulled against the harder metal. On the ridge, Queen Ati watched from her litter, her frame trembling. not with fear but with rage. Her guards closed around her, shields raised. Beside her, King Pharaoh's voice cracked with despair. "The gods have abandoned us," he whispered. Below, chaos reigned. Villages burned. Elephants stampeded, ivory tusks glinting in the firelight, before crashing into the sea. Monkeys shrieked in terror, their cages overturned. The very symbols of Punt's wealth turned to madness. The raiders were merciless. They came from the highlands, tribes hardened by famine and thirst. To them, Punt was not a land of gods, but a prize fat with riches. Ivory, incense, cattle, slaves, all ripe for the taking. Nari fought until his arms ached. His body streaked with blood, his own. His enemies he could not tell. He saw his childhood home collapse in flames, his mother's necklace glinting in the ashes. With each step he realized paradise was no more. Punt was being carved apart like a carcass before vultures. In the palace the final blow came. Raiders stormed the compound, their iron blades slicing through the king's guards. Pharaoh fell, blood staining his leopard skin cloak. Queen Ati, dragged from her litter, raised her voice one last time. "We are Punt. We are eternal." Her cry was drowned in the roar of fire. By dawn the land of gods lay in ruin. The incense groves smoldered, the markets silent, the people scattered into slavery or exile. Where once wealth overflowed, only ashes remained. Far away in Egypt the Nile flowed on. Priests still burned incense in temples, chanting prayers to Amun, never knowing that the groves which fed their fires now lay in smoke and ruin. On Hatshepsut's temple walls, Punt still lived, eternal in stone, even as the real kingdom bled out into dust. And yet amid the ashes Nari survived. Scarred, orphaned, alone, he staggered into the wilderness. Behind him, Punt, the land richer than Egypt, was gone. But history is never so simple. For though the kingdom burned, whispers of Punt refused to die. The kingdom of Punt did not fall in a single night of fire. It withered in silence. Its people scattered, its groves abandoned, its rivers shrinking to trickles. What raids did not destroy, famine finished. What famine did not kill, exile carried away. Nari wandered through the ruins of his homeland. Once the air had been thick with spice, with the laughter of merchants, the chants of priests. Now the silence was so deep, it seemed the gods themselves had turned away. The incense trees stood like skeletons, their bark split, their roots clawing at the dust. He traveled north, crossing deserts and rivers, telling strangers of Punt, of queens covered in gold, of groves that touched the sky, of a land richer than Egypt. Some listened in awe, others laughed in disbelief. Her kingdom richer than Pharaoh, they sneered. If it were true, where is it now? And so piece by piece the story of Punt unraveled. Without ships sailing the Red Sea, without envoys carrying its treasures to Egypt, the name of Punt became a ghost. In Thebes, Bek, older now, his hair white, his steps slow, still visited the temple walls of Deir el-Bahri. There, immortalized in stone, Punt lived forever. He traced the carvings of Queen Ati in her litter, of the incense trees carried by sailors, of riches that dazzled the Pharaoh's court. But Bek knew those carvings were lies of survival. The walls showed Punt as eternal, but outside those walls Punt was gone. Egypt's scribes stopped writing its name. Pharaohs turned their eyes to Syria, to Nubia, to lands that yielded tribute through war. The Red Sea voyages ended, and the routes to Punt faded into myth. A land once richer than Egypt slipped into the shadows, remembered only in fragments. Some said Punt was cursed, a kingdom consumed by its own arrogance. Others claimed it never truly existed, that it was only a dream carved by Pharaoh's artisans. But Bek and Nari knew the truth, though their voices were swallowed by time. By the time centuries passed, Punt was no longer a place. It was a story scattered across the winds, carried in whispers by sailors and priests. Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, all claimed it, but none could prove it. And so Punt became the greatest trick history ever played. A kingdom so rich it rivaled Egypt, yet so fragile it vanished without leaving a single city, a single monument, a single trace in the earth. But legends never die. They wait, and even in silence Punt's shadow stretched into the future. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell, Assyria, Persia, Rome, yet none remembered Punt. Egypt's temples crumbled, sand swallowed its monuments, and the land richer than Egypt became nothing more than whispers carved in fading stone. But whispers have power. In the 19th century, when European explorers stumbled into the Horn of Africa, they heard stories from locals of an ancient land where incense once flowed like rivers, where queens were worshipped as gods, where wealth dazzled brighter than the sun. Their ears pricked. Could this be Punt? Scholars scoured Egyptian hieroglyphs, tracing the journeys of Hatshepsut's fleet, carvings of incense trees, of Queen Ati and her litter, carved Puntite huts on stilts. They seemed too detailed to be myth. But the question remained, where was it? Some argued Punt lay in Somalia, where frankincense still perfumes the markets. Others pointed to Eritrea or Ethiopia, where highlands could have birthed the ivory and ebony, once carried to Egypt. A few whispered wilder tales, that Punt sank beneath the Red Sea, swallowed like Atlantis, its riches locked forever under the waves. Still, the search continues. Archaeologists dig, explorers map coastlines, historians chase fragments of truth through scrolls and ruins. Every shard of pottery, every ancient trade route, every whisper of incense burned in a forgotten shrine draws them closer to an answer, and yet the heart of Punt resists. It is a ghost kingdom, revealed in stone yet absent in earth. The more scholars seek, the more it slips away. But perhaps that is the true legacy of Punt. Not its gold, not its incense, not even its forgotten kings and queens. Punt's gift to history is the dream it left behind, a dream of paradise, of wealth beyond measure, of a kingdom that once rivaled Egypt and then vanished like smoke on the wind. Bek's story ends on the temple walls, his name lost to time. Nari's voice vanished into the desert, his memories swallowed by silence. But through them, through their fear, their pride, their despair, Punt still breathes. In every historian's question, in every explorer's map, in every dreamer's imagination, the land richer than Egypt may be gone, erased by fire and famine, by shifting sands and failing memory. But when you walk into a temple in Luxor and see the carvings of a queen in her litter, incense trees swaying, sailors bowing, you are standing in the shadow of Punt. And shadows, unlike kingdoms, never truly die. For Punt is not just a lost land. It is a reminder that even the richest paradise can vanish. But its story will haunt humanity forever. If this story of the forgotten kingdom of Punt amazed you, imagine the other secrets history still hides. Hit like, drop a comment on what you think really happened to Punt. And don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories of lost empires, vanished civilizations, and mysteries erased from time.